my name is Beck and welcome to another Dresden Files review. I am going to be talking about the 10th book in the Dresden Files, Small Favour, and I'm also going to be discussing spoilers and spoiler-free content. So the first part of the video is going to be spoiler-free, and then I will very clearly indicate when we go into spoilers so you can click away. So let's get into it. What is this about? I have to be very sparse about what is going on here because we are 10 books now into a series, which is why I've started to integrate spoilers. Otherwise my reviews are just reduced to, I love this, yay, okay, like, subscribe, bye. So I don't want that to be what this is, but I think it might be for the start of this video. Either way, the title of this video implies that there is a favour from one of the she, so one of the Fae, and that comes into play with Dresden here. So once again, he is caught between promises he needs to make, alliances that he's made in the past, his friends and protecting them, and political angles as well from the different supernatural creatures that have been introduced along through the series so far too. So there are a lot of moving parts in here naturally. The central theme in here also revolves very much around family, with follow-up themes of responsibility, respect and faith as well playing into it, which I really enjoy. His central themes and the way they inform character in each of his installments are some of the key things that I keep coming back to this for. And so naturally this theme of family led me to thinking about fan family, which is one of the things that I love seeing in a book or in a series in general, and that kind of naturally happens when characters have been through traumatic events together, which is very much what the Dresden Files covers. But I love how the characters around Dresden now are basically his family. He's found all of them, he's either taken them under his wing or he's trusted them in some way, and through those bonds, they start backing each other up and forming different alliances, which I really enjoyed. And true to form, this book hooked me in the very opening with its action scene. Usually the action scenes across the Dresden books are very informed and I'm very easily able to imagine what's going on. There's always a purpose and there's always some form of flair that is very nail-biting. And I love how the tension in the first scene here with the other characters around Dresden informed the family theme going forward. And it had a very distinct opening moment and then a very distinct closure that was very satisfying as well. And it was just played all through the book after this first ripple effect scene. And I love the growth and I love the characters and I love the interaction. And like I said, I love the bonds that have formed from these characters so far throughout the series. I wish I could say names, but I'll get into that later. I say this pretty much for every Dresden Files book now, but it's no less true no matter how many times I say it. The characterization is always on point here. Whatever the characters' actions are, they are often very informed by their beliefs. And to me, nothing really seemed out of character. It seemed very much in character, and that is why I love them so much. As well as the plot in here, usually Dresden Files books have very breakneck speeds, and I love all of that, and I love the quieter moments that are interspersed as well. I think they're very balanced, and in this case it was pretty much balanced here as well, except for a few small things, but that's probably a personal preference, given that I don't like a particular aspect of supernatural creature, and that tended to play into this a little bit more than it has in the past. But to me, that made it feel like the plot very much left certain pieces out that only appeared at the beginning and then at the end as like touch points to say, hey, this is a thing that's still happening. Oh, there's an action scene and it's kind of related. Oh, by the way, here is the ending, boom. And it didn't have the same effect to me because it felt like a distraction based on the other things that were happening in the book. I'll talk more about it in detail later in the spoiler section, but that is my non-spoiler, very vague, I didn't like this thing and I'll explain why later moment about this particular book. But Dresden Files books usually score quite high with me anyway, and this was no different. I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. I wish some things hadn't been as chaotic and busy because it would have let more time for the other parts of the plot that I was more interested in to take the front, but this felt like a lot of maneuvering and a lot of stuff going on that needs to be fleshed out in order for things to have more ripple effect later. So I like the introduction or the continuation of a few aspects and a few characters. I almost spoiled something, but I didn't, that happened in here, and the foes are starting to get a lot darker and a lot more scary. Not that they weren't before, but I just really enjoyed this book. So now I want to talk about spoilers. So around this video it's going to go red, and if you don't want to hear about spoilers, I'll see you later. Chat to me in the comments, but now we're going to talk spoiler territory. To start off, I want to talk about the opening scene because I couldn't say names before, but now I can. So I loved how Dresden and the Carpenter family interacted. I especially loved how the tension evolved from that immediate action scene with the Gruffs attacking everybody. And I love how Molly has now developed to this point that she can kind of hold her own even though she's not technically a combat wizard. I really enjoyed those growth moments. They were very small, but they had been built up for a few books, and so it was a really good payoff that was small but very well earned. And there was another moment like that as well at the start with Dresden and his magic, where instead of blowing off the door from its hinges like he usually would in the past, he took his time to narrow his focus and he only messed up the hinges of the door rather than did a big explosive thing which might have injured the people around the door as well. I like that nuance that we're getting, and I think that's been evident across a few other books as well, but I'll never not notice it because I really enjoy the development. And it's not magic related, but it is family related, which again was a big theme in here. I'll talk more about it obviously, but the Carpenter family played a big role in that. But Thomas came back in this, and I was very annoyed in the previous book where he kind of got sidelined because other stuff had to take favor in the plot, and then he came back in this, which I really liked, especially with some of his dialogue. Often I think that Thomas is there for him to have kind of a talking head dialogue banter situation with Dresden and lighten the tone, but Dresden is like that with everybody and Thomas just tends to fire back. So I think it's a very good balance of humor that pops up throughout the books to see him in them. And I especially like that moment with Thomas, Dresden and Mouse in the apartment where Thomas has just realized that Mouse can understand him and says, oh, all that stuff I said about Dresden, don't read into it. And Mouse just huffs at him. It was very satisfying and I had to pause the audiobook because I was giggling so much. So again, the humor in this book is just the best. Despite all of the tension in this book and the fraught nature of the series so far with like obviously life-threatening situations, there are always little moments of humor that don't particularly seem displaced, especially because Dresden tends to deflect using humor when he's terrified. So it's always got a place in these books and I always love when it tends to crop up because Jim Butcher just seems to understand his characters and so he weaves it in so that it doesn't break my enjoyment of the story. It doesn't seem out of place. And then going into something completely different, Dresden doesn't seem to be faithful in the same way that Michael is. So I wanted to talk about faith as well as the theme of family, and that is what this segue is. So I wanted to talk about Dresden having faith in things, but not in God or gods necessarily, or angels. And that's very much evident with him at the very end of the book where he's in the chapel and he's admonishing God and saying like, you should save Michael because all he's done in his life is good and that should be rewarded for good. So he kind of sticks it to the man and I love it. But he believes very much in his friends and in love and loyalty, and that faith in his friends should be repaid in them being rewarded in a sense of they're not dying, which, you know, is pretty low bar. Like, please don't kill my friends and don't let them die, universe. Just do that one thing for me. So I was really terrified when Michael got shot. I was freaking out because in the past couple of books, it has been alluded to that he's going to die soon from his own mouth. Like, that's what he has verbally said to Dresden. And so when he got shot, I remembered he was wearing body armor, so I had a little bit of disbelief that it would be actually happening. But then when Dresden got to the hospital and he was going into surgery and it said the bullet had ricocheted within him because he was wearing the body armor, I was like, oh, Michael's gonna go. His family are here in the waiting room, and it is tragic that Molly and Dresden have to leave because otherwise if they're present, then the machines won't work, so they can't go and see him in the hospital, which was just heartbreaking. And that is what led to the scene of Dresden in the chapel, and that scene is one of the scenes that made me cry. I think it was brilliantly executed, and anything that has love and loyalty in it that is that taut, like that tense in a book and that intense, is bound to make me cry because the connections between the characters are what I read books for, and it was very obvious in that scene. Another moment that made me cry was also in the waiting room when Charity turned around to Dresden, and this is her own character growth as well, which I love because she's not a side character that is prevalent like Murphy would be, but she has her own development in the sense that she said to Dresden, family stays. And this is a far cry from what she used to be. When Dresden turned up on her doorstep, she would often turn him away and not even let him inside. So it has been that growth of her character into acceptance and into letting him into their family circle. And that, I think, is why it made me so emotional, because it also showed that connection between Dresden and Charity, as well as Dresden and Molly and that Carpenter family. So anything with family and loyalty and found family and friends is just bound to make me cry, let's be real. I'm also relieved that Michael didn't die. I don't know if I explicitly said that or not, but I'm really happy that he didn't die. I also thought that he might not, given that it didn't seem to thematically fit with Murphy not making the choice to take up the sword yet. But that leads me into another point of discussing urban fantasy and gods and angels. And usually I'm not a gods and angels type of girl. I prefer urban fantasy to have all of its monsters very quantifiable, And that's why I liked this at the very beginning, because it had werewolves and vampires and ghouls and all that kind of thing. Oh, I mean, I guess the ghouls came in later, but you know what I mean. When it came up with, oh, there's gods in here, I was like intrigued but nervous, because you got to do it really right and walk this very fine line for me personally to get God's right or God right in a book. And I think this did it in a way that I could accept it, because when characters are introduced, or when bad guys and villains are introduced, all of them still remain dangerous. They don't just suddenly become easy fodder for Dresden. He considers everything particularly dangerous. And I think that's what I like about the series. Even though it's introducing these villains that are more high stakes, it's also still maintaining the fact that vampires are still very dangerous. The Sidhe are still very dangerous. And so I think because it left that level of Dresden might die and it could be anything, it left the stakes high regardless, rather than going, oh, by the way, he doesn't care about vampires anymore, they're not as scary, so stakes aren't very high. So if he had an interaction with a vampire in the future, I just wouldn't care, because there wouldn't be as much tension. But I think Jim Butcher did this very smartly, and he's integrated everything to the point where I believe everything is very dangerous and wanting to kill Dresden, and Dresden is very afraid of everything. So I like that Dresden's power is also leveling up, but I like that the danger hasn't dissipated at the same time. Additionally, talking about characters, we had some awesome stuff with Murphy happen in this book. Finally, I love Murphy and Dresden. If you couldn't tell, I love them together potentially or separately. They're both amazing characters to me, so hopefully they get together. That's what I'm hoping for in the future. Please don't confirm, because I will find out what happens, because I'm going to continue reading. But I love how now she's officially politically entered the game, as well as obviously being Dresden's friend and backup. She has politically entered and become her own character, because she's gone, I'm a cop, I protect the people, my job is to protect and serve, get out of this tavern, giant goat. So I loved that moment, and I love how Murphy is very much a mirror of Dresden, with her own ideals that are very similar to his. And he hates when she throws herself in danger, and she hates when he throws himself in danger. I love that back and forth between them that I don't really think they realize is a back and forth. The whole idea of a character basically jumping in front of danger to protect the other one is another weakness of mine, and I think Murphy and Dresden would very much do that for each other. I was also really excited that I saw the fact that she would be offered a choice to take up that sword that Dresden had appear in the book. I was so excited about that, but I also understood that she's not in the right place yet to take up that sword. She's already made a stake and a claim about protecting the people as a human. And while Michael, yes, obviously he's a human, we've seen in the past that Murphy has struggled with her faith, and I think she's got a bit more internal struggle to go through before she gets to being able to make that choice for herself in taking up the sword. And so I really, this character weaving is so genius. I love it so much, because even though she didn't do what I wanted, which was to take up the sword, I understood exactly why, because she'd had the right build up for that to be a realistic outcome. So again, character work, amazing. And then I also loved her tender moment with Dresden when he held her while she cried and then he kissed her head. It was just so sweet, even though it came from her being worried about Kincaid, because we don't talk about Kincaid here. I'm not a fan of Kincaid, even though the aside about him being a hellhound was super interesting. I still don't really like Kincaid. He makes interesting backup and he has interesting backstory now, seemingly with the archive. Apart from that, I don't really care about him, and I'm all for Murphy and Dresden getting together. So when Lucio was like bathing herself in front of Dresden at his house or at his apartment, and he woke up and saw her in the moonlight, and then they had a moment later on in the book, I was like, I really hope this is an end game, because I really don't want you guys together. I can support a fling, I think that would be interesting, but I hope you're also not manipulating him to distract him, because the Black Council is still a thing, and I don't know if Lucio would be involved or not, and this would be a very easy distraction for Dresden to fall into and have his heart broken all over again, and I don't want that to happen. So hopefully Lucio isn't endgame, and I only support them for this brief period, because I want Murphy and Dresden to be a thing instead. Anyway, before I talked about action scenes, and I did mention the one at the beginning, but there were so many littered throughout this book that I really loved. I loved all of them, basically. The museum, the archive using magic, which was awesome. The shootout at the very end, and the station that was before that too. It had so many incredible moments. I also loved the part at the very end with Dresden and Nicodemus, when Nicodemus was on the boat with him and Dresden was trying to escape the cursed island. Side note, love how Dresden's prophecy power is coming in. We see his magic leveling up yet again. But that moment in the boat was just the best because it had that build up to the little moment of rebellion with Dresden where Nicodemus thought Lashiel was still in his head and she wasn't. So when he gave Lashiel an order instead of Dresden, Dresden could just play along and then grab him by the neck chain to strangle him. I loved that moment. It was such a good payoff because Nicodemus terrifies me. He's such an awesome, cold-hearted villain. And you just know that he'll do whatever it takes. He doesn't often do the villain monologue, which we learned early on when he took Dresden and waterboarded him. He's like, well, I guess it's time for you to die. And then an intervention at that moment of his decision was Dresden basically getting saved. And so you know that he doesn't have any holds barred. He will do whatever it takes in order to get his end goal. And so when Nicodemus is on the page, when he has screen time, I'm always scared. And that is the sign of a good villain to me. So in this moment at the end, when Dresden could actually stick it to him and fight back, I was like, this is so well earned. I love this moment. And also I like that the Denarians can be killed. It's evident that they can be, but it is very hard to do. And I like that there's 30 coins, I think. So there's potential for them to be 30 strong, which is a terrifying concept when Nicodemus is so strong in his own. The fact that the Denarians and Nicodemus in general are so powerful, yes, it terrifies me, but it also means that the characters that we root for, the good characters, when they're in a scene with a Denarian or Nicodemus, for example, there's always that level of uncertainty. And I like that there's that power play, but they're not outbalanced too much. And the scales could be tipped by one little thing or another in the favor of one side or the other. And to me, that is very high stakes. And that element of not knowing which way a scene would necessarily turn out is what intrigues me and also keeps me reading, as well as the breakneck speed and the characterization and all of the lore that is being introduced about this world. It's a whole cluster of amazing things, but I need to say the thing that I didn't really enjoy, and that was the Fae aspect. So at the beginning, the thing that incites the plot is the she. So one of the queens of the Fae courts come and ask Dresden, hey, you owe me a favor. It's one of two. So that's why the title is a thing. I didn't love the way that the Fae aspect was interwoven. It felt like an extra thing that had been thrown on top. Yes, it incited action at the beginning, and there were the cool moments of the action scenes with the goat's gruff, but again at the end it just had the tension of Queen Mab going, by the way, I can control you if I want to because I made you forget about losing your staff, which I didn't even clock until it was mentioned in the plot, so she made me forget too. Anyway, the Fae in the book just don't do it for me, at least not in this book. They have in the past, but this felt like it was too full to the brim of other things that I was way more interested in. And then it just felt like a start and then a closure for the Fae court being involved. It didn't feel like it had enough gravity in each of the scenes because there were other things that were taking the attention. So that is the only gripe really that I have with this book. And because of that, it made some of the plot feel distracting or disjointed. Not all of it, because obviously I loved this book, but I didn't love it as much as I've loved some of the others in the past. I'm also just somebody who generally isn't into Fae, especially in urban fantasies, so that might also play into it a little bit. I'm sure a lot of other people would adore the Fae aspect, and I do, don't get me wrong, I do enjoy it, but it's just not my favourite aspect of this series. To be fair, there's a lot to love, so I just take that instead, and that's what my focus is preferred to be. But when it comes to the Fae, it has to be done right and well and integrated very, very seamlessly, and when it's not, like this book felt to me, it stands out and is quite glaringly obvious. So hopefully it's integrated better in the future because I've enjoyed things in the past with the Fae. But they just seem again like very powerful beings with not a lot that Dresden can use to fight back against them. So that alone makes them scary and that alone makes them interesting. But I like having a little bit of an element of, hey, I can kind of bring the balance back a little, like with the Denarians being able to be killed. Yes, they're terrifying, yes, they're powerful, but Dresden can hold his own in some ways, sometimes against them. If not, he can escape. But with the Fae court, I feel like them wiping his memory, or Queen Mab at least, being able to wipe the memory of him losing his staff, that's just too overpowered for me. And so hopefully it brings it down to a level, or Dresden elevates himself to a level that he can take that kind of foe on. So it did plant some interesting things in regards to fear, tension, and characterization, but for what it did for the plot of this book, I wasn't really satisfied. And so now we have reached the conclusion, which is basically just me saying that I adored the family theme, I adored the faith theme, I adored all of the characterization and the busyness of the plot. Even though I didn't love all of the plot elements, I loved 90% of them, to be honest. And there was that moment at the end with the jelly donut, which I quite enjoyed. There were also a ton of aspects that spoke to the progression of characters in this book, as well as the progression of world building, which are both things that I really like. And I'm really happy that it's weaving itself in ways that obviously made me really emotional, especially in this installment. The only distraction really to me was the Fae, and that has been discussed previously, so my rating obviously is 4.5 stars, which I said earlier. Obviously I'm going to continue reading this series. Please come and chat to me down below, but hopefully I give the next book a 5 stars, but I guess we'll find out when I read it. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'll chat to you down in the comments, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye.